All righty. Well, welcome to the Commercial Alliance of Realtors. The joy of Zoom and the gallery view. I can see all your beautiful and smiling faces. Ideally, you can see mine also. I'm seeing folks here with us who've been with us since the very beginning. Rory and John and Lisa and whatnot. And I'm seeing a bunch of new faces. For the sake of the new faces, I want to give you a real brief feel of who we are, how we came together, and what we're doing, as well as how you may integrate the Commercial Alliance of Realtors into your business. So the Commercial Alliance of Realtors is a council within NEFAR. It's been around for years, and depending on the year, it's been somewhere between dynamic and dormant. And about a year and a half ago, Scott Nyman, who at the time was at Summit, I see Scott's in the car, welcome Scott. Scott Nyman at the time was Summit, now he was over at EXP, but anyway, he approached myself as well as Nicole Ryan, who's at Exit Commercial, and said, hey, we'd really like to bring a lot of life back into this thing. What say we have a meeting and see if we can't breathe life into it and grow the Commercial Alliance of Realtors Council for the sole and singular purpose of growing the businesses of the people in NEFAR who are involved in commercial, fantasize about commercial, or otherwise have an interest in commercial real estate. So we met at River and Post. We spent an hour together and we mapped out an entire year's worth of programs. We've been doing 4 to 6 training presentations as lunch and learns. We do those again at River and Post. And we also, on the months where we're not involved directly in training and business development, we do happy hours down at, used to be called The Tree, what do we call that now? Chop House 13. So we've been active really for more than a year. With the advent of things going virtual, we, rather than shut it all down, we said, gosh, we can build on the momentum. We'll actually reach a lot more people. We can do a lot of good for our individual businesses and the local economy overall by keeping it alive. So that's what we're doing. The who is involved in commercial real estate, specifically with the Commercial Alliance of Realtors, it's very broad. There's people like Sandra Kelly, who's a CCIM, who's been a commercial person for 30 or 40 years. There's people who are brand new to real estate, hardly even sold a home yet, and have a fantasy that commercial could be lucrative for them. So our position is, with the help of NEFAR, everyone is welcome. There's a place for everyone. For some people in conversation, they have that desire to transition from residential to commercial. Exclusively. Some have the desire to dabble or do a little bit. And what we're attempting to do through the education process is make it immensely clear that this commercial universe is a different universe. And the things that may have brought you success and great economics in residential, many of those will destroy you in commercial. Likewise, some of the things you've done well in residential will complement. So we have a whole host of topics we've been going over, and that's how that is. If you have a question as I'm moving along in the presentation, raise your hand or wave at me, and we'll jump out of the screen share and back into the face-to-face. So I love and welcome interface, especially in person. We're in person. I just can't quite touch you nor smell you, and that's okay too. So without further ado, let me, here we go back to the screen share. All righty. So leaders in commercial real estate, that's the role, that's the goal, that's where we'd like to take you. I want to spend special thanks to our sponsors. Our sponsors all committed to an annual sponsorship. We did that for consistency, we did that for budgeting. And so we're very grateful to all of them. We're actually not spending any money here, it looks like, for a quarter or so. So when we're back to doing live events, we should have top shelf drinks and far better appetizers. But Lisa Andrews at Gold Dog Title has been with us from the beginning, very grateful. They also have lawyers and specific expertise in your commercial as well as your residential. Monument Commercial Building Inspections, love those guys. To be true, full disclosure, I own that company. That's the commercial company that does all the things that Home Pro doesn't. And Landmark Title, Nicole Carroll, Dave Heekin, and their whole team of lawyers have been very supportive to us. And they also have specific expertise in commercial and oddball stuff. That's good. So what in the world is a commercial building? Where is that line in the sand that says this is a residential building, this is a commercial building? In one sense, it comes down to use, but just to give you some quick feels, everything that you see there around Jacksonville in this picture is in fact a commercial building. It may not be that the Independent Life Building, old picture, Modus Building, older picture, I think it's Wells Fargo now, that might not be your first commercial building, but know that the sky is the limit in the commercial. Some of the more typical things we see, the things that sell more often, are things maybe like an Olive Garden, like a freestanding restaurant, or maybe even a chain of restaurants. And it's interesting, it's relatively common that in these chain restaurants or Jiffy Lubes, other franchise type chains, the business owner rarely owns the building. Rather, there are REITs or other types of investors who may own 6 or 10 or 20 of these buildings. So one can turn into many very quickly. Things like San Marco downtown, strip centers, strip malls, commercial buildings. These get interesting again. Some of them are owned individually, some are owned collectively. They're owned in lots of strange ways. So there's no shortage of things to learn just about ownership. This is down at Hemming Plaza, historic buildings, lots of commercial, lots of reuse of buildings. This is the fire station down there next to Burrito Gallery. It was a fire station for about 100 years. It's now a residence. It's been a residence for about a decade. So there's all sorts of things. This happens to be a bank. So the things that could be considered commercial buildings are almost boundless. This happens to be a typical office park around town. Coincidentally, it's my office. Here's a neat thing. It was a house. It's now a commercial building. Many of you know this building. It is right across from Mossfire Grill. It was a residence. It's now the home of Sally Sussleck's company, Traditions Realty. So it's a broad area and industrial and vacant land. It's mind-boggling how large it is. And the discovery is in commercial, the larger the project, the more significant your individual niche becomes. So who are commercial real estate clients? Again, they run the gamut also. Doctors who then decide they're going to build out a medical practice or multiple medical practices or hospital. A lot of doctors involved in commercial building, both for their own practices and also taking excess income for strip centers, restaurants, and other things. Lawyers, again, very involved, both for their own practices, referrals to their clients who are buying and selling commercial property, as well as their own individual needs. Restaurants, very big category. This is Tom Gray and Moxie prior to the rebranding. So there's a boundless type of buildings, and there's boundless types of buyers. And the challenge is to find your place of comfort. What kind of buyers gravitate to you naturally and are you most comfortable with? Maybe based on your past career, based on the type of residential you've been doing, based on your social activities. It's figuring that out. And how do these commercial and residential clients differ? In a word, 2 words, residential clients tend to use adjectives, commercial clients tend to use numbers. It's all about the math. And the more sophisticated the commercial buyer, the more complex the property, the more and more and more they are math focused. So for the real estate agent who says, I love selling real estate, I hate math, commercial is not a good transition. For the person that says, I'm all about the business, I love the math, I just want to dig in and do the research, commercial is a really sweet spot. And I share that to say, and this varies company to company. There are real estate companies that have a very strong residential presence, and they also have a commercial presence. There are companies that have a very strong commercial presence and have no residential presence. Certainly inside your existing company structure, if commercial lives there, that seems like the right place to begin those relationships. If it's not there, one of the reasons we do the happy hours and the other things at the Commercial Alliance is to create relationships between professionals outside of their normal sphere. Referral often is the right best thing to do in commercial. How are the commercial real estate and agents different? Much like the clients, they tend to be more numbers focused rather than adjective focused, and they tend to be immensely secretive as a group. The real estate agents in commercial are all too, or residential, are all too eager to tell you what I've got listed and what I've got pending and what I'm doing here and how much I did last year. It's a very open, a piece of the marketing and the branding is what you've got going on. Commercial tends to be much more close held to the vest. Some of that has to do with because of the sensitivity of the client, either buyer side or seller side. Very often in a commercial transaction, the tenant in the commercial building doesn't even know the building's for sale. In fact, they don't want it to be known for sale. So there's much more of a close to the vest approach. So what's a commercial building inspection? This was interesting in particular for me when we made the transition. And the transition came slowly over time, and it started for us, and you may find in your listing and sales thing, it's much the same way. We did and continue to do a very large number of high-end residences. The people who live in houses at $1 million or $2.5 million or $5 million or $7 million are the same people who often own companies and have commercial holdings. And I would get the call, hey, Wally, who do you know that can inspect this commercial building? And I said, well, we can do that. And we ended up making a transition by starting a completely separate company because of the name of the company. Home Pro didn't sound like a residential company. In your real estate company, you may discover the same thing, that your brand, both individually and as a company, is totally associated with residential, and it makes being taken seriously by long-term, dyed-in-the-wool commercial brokers as well as commercial customers not taking it so seriously. So let's take a look at how this due diligence is different in commercial. So they differ from home inspections in quite a few ways. One has to do with the sophistication of the person receiving the information. It's relatively rare to see much math in a residential home inspection. In a commercial building inspection, it's common that it's almost entirely math. It's also common on the residential side that the buyer is deeply involved in the due diligence. They're there at the inspection, they're there at the WDO, they're very involved. In the commercial sense, the more sophisticated the buyer and the larger and more complex the property, the less likely that you're ever going to come in contact with the individual. That is in the inspection process. The commercial, the commercial due diligence, what you might call building inspection, has a different name when it's done completely as a commercial venture. And it's called a property condition assessment, or PCA. That particular report, that assessment, is defined in this standard, the ASTM standard, American Society of Testing and Materials. So unlike the home inspection universe, where every state's a little bit different, every company's a little bit different, every individual is looking for something slightly different, in the commercial world, this ATM standard defines precisely in a national level how this due diligence is done and what the formatics is and what the output is. I'm going to take you through a sample PCA just to give you an idea. Because if in your first or early time in commercial, the first time you want to see one of these PCAs and you reference your familiarity with a typical home inspection, you're like, what in the world is going on? How did this crazy person come up with this? I'm going to give you some samples. I will also share with you that depending on the complexity of the building and depending on the sophistication of the buyer, sometimes that property condition assessment, or the building inspector who's doing that, it's advantageous to use something that's closer to a more traditional home inspection. For us individually, our software can do both. And as an example, if it was a doctor buying a home in Riverside, what looks like a home, to use as an office, he's not really a sophisticated commercial buyer. That piece of property doesn't really look like a commercial property, how you might think of it. So we'll, in concert with the agent and the customer, make the determination, is the PCA the most appropriate document, or is a more traditional home inspection / building inspection a more traditional document? And it's important when a lender's involved that you're aware what the lender's expectation is. Very, very often the financing is contingent on the PCA and other pieces of due diligence that I'll show to you. So it's important that you're asking the right questions, that you're in the hands of people who've done this so they can give you that explanation. So cover page on a property condition assessment. This is the ASTM standard. ASTM is an interesting organization to work with. They actually charge you $75 for a copy of the standard. So that alone limits the crowd. They also delineate, not that you need to memorize or know this, but line by line by line, they're determining what's the terminology, what's the use. It's a very formatic type document. So when a PCA has been requested by or for your buyer or the lender, and sometimes it varies, and you start seeing things in there that look bizarre, know that the terminology, every single word in there is defined. So it's very specific. So what does the PCA team look like? The ASTM standard defines the team that's doing this commercial due diligence to produce the property condition assessment. It consists of a consultant, a field observer, and a reviewer. And you'll understand in a little bit why that is. In some cases, it is all the same individual, but the roles are different. The consultant concentrates on the due diligence that occurs before the inspection. The field observer concentrates on gathering the data in the field, and the report reviewer is the person responsible to build that all together into a cohesive plan that is formatically correct and useful to the customer. So the elements of the PCA, again, this is right out of the standard. There's a document review and interviews. Very often the early interviews are with building maintenance people, sometimes architects, engineers. Who is the team of people who either built or maintains this particular building? All of those documents that they have become a piece of the PCA when it's done at the full level. The walkthrough survey, that's what you would typically think of as the building inspection. A cost schedule. The numbers get very, very sophisticated and very, very specific in a PCA. And lastly is the report and document itself. So what occurs in that document review? It begins with a certificate of occupancy. Any previous PCAs were done. It's interesting, in the residential universe, they tend to guard and hide past reports. In the commercial universe, there's a full expectation that those things be shared so that the documents are as accurate as possible. Much more use of construction documents and drawings. On the residential side, the only time you typically see that is in new construction phase inspections. In commercial, especially as the buildings get larger and more sophisticated, it is an expectation that it's a piece of the deliverable. Maintenance agreements, very often there's an owner of the building, there's a tenant or multiple tenants even occupying the building, and separate maintenance agreements or maintenance companies to maintain it in its entirety or by system and sometimes by tenant. Any warranties, very often in commercial, there's very extensive warranty programs that require routine inspection by the initial installer. Very common in roofing, very common with more sophisticated heating and cooling systems. So those warranties, and these are not typically warranty companies like you're accustomed to a home warranty. These are manufacturer's warranties administered by the installer or maintenance company, and there's requirements of what needs to happen for them to remain valid. And then the pre-site questionnaire and interviews. These are things sent out by the commercial building company, the person in charge of the PCA, that's going to the various participants. So all of the data comes in before there's any on-site work. And those documents are all distilled down into what you see in front of you. That's a document review, and it's showing what documents were reviewed and the summary and highlight from each document. So what happens on that site survey? That looks a whole bunch like what you would expect in a typical home inspection or small building inspection. We're looking at, and these items are defined in the PCA ASTM standard. We're looking at all of those things. Depending on the size and scope and complexity of the building, very often the building inspection company who's doing the PCA will bring additional expertise to bear. In the residential universe, very rare that the home inspector shows up with a mechanical guy, an electrical guy, and a plumbing guy. In commercial buildings, it is a bit more common. If the buildings are fairly simple, say under 50,000 feet, under 100,000 feet, warehouse space, relatively common that the building inspection company will have that all live in-house. The most common things you'll typically see the commercial building inspection bring from the outside is life safety items and fire suppression and whatnot. And the other is elevators, very, very common. Useful life table. There's an expectation, in fact, it is described in the PCA standard, that life cycles and expenses is a significant part of it. All of these come out of national databases, RS means and similar things, well, that's for pricing, but other documents. So the document can be complete, correct, consistent, as well as substantiated. Identifying any problem materials or other difficulties, those are all broken out. And you may notice in there things like aluminum branch wiring, polybutylene pipe, the types of things that come out as identified as known problematic vary dramatically between the building types. So in multifamily housing, apartment buildings, condominiums, high rises, they appear somewhat similar to what a person may be accustomed to in residential. As we move to more industrial, they look quite foreign and tend to be almost industry or building-like specific. A lot of use of drones, aerial, as well as internet type stuff. So that's an expectation of the customer. One of the things on that is another thing in commercial buildings, it's very, very typical, say unlike a residential condominium for an individual buyer, that the parking lots, the lighting, the number of spaces, the striping, on-site and off-site drainage, swales, retention ponds, all of those things are in the mix. Also, much like you're accustomed to seeing on the residential side, interiors and overviews. These are not as much focused on imperfections in the interiors, much like you're accustomed to in residential, but rather an overview. And why that's important is so often the decisions are being made by people in another state, sometimes in another country, sometimes by committee. Very often the person in charge of acquisition isn't the person actually making those final decisions. So there's a lot of presentation that goes on in this. Opinion of probable cost schedules, they break those down, meaning what things are broken right now and what's it going to cost to make it work again. Capital repairs, this will vary again with the depth of the PCA, but what do we need? What are we spending over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, over the next 20 years? What's that going to look like? RS Means and Marshall and Shaw are examples of nationally recognized pricing guides. RS Means in particular also does residential. They're tougher to use in residential because the numbers are so small. What do I mean by that? So if someone says, how much is a dishwasher? And somebody says it's 500 bucks and somebody says 1,000 bucks, it's only a $500 difference, but it's 100% difference. In the larger, more complex projects, believe it or not, though the numbers get larger, the variance tends to get smaller in the hands of people who can do like-minded things. Professional quotes and estimates, sometimes in the course of the PCA, we are asked or tasked to provide one or more quotes from contractors who can do the repair or do the replacement. That's virtually never done as a piece of a home inspection in residential, depending on the desires of the client, the sophistication of the building, what the agent's asking for. Very often that's done. and personal or team experience is a big piece of it. Immediate repairs and replacement, those are always involved in life, and these are by definition in the ASTM standards. None of this is my invention. This is all extracted right from the standard, and the reason I'm doing it that way, so that you'll be aware that it exists, and it's immensely specific, so that you're prepared as you venture into this for these things. Critical repairs within 6 months, deferred maintenance is more than a year, life safety is always critical. Capital replacement, the definition typically used is $3,000 or more, or an evaluation period of 2 years minimum, meaning it's got 2 years life left, much like you're accustomed to in residential insurance. Next is environmental due diligence. This is a giant deal in commercial properties, and for larger properties, for brownfields. A great example is the shipyards in downtown Jacksonville. That has been sitting there essentially as an EPA, it might be a super fund, don't quote me on that, but has, you know, I believe the number is $30 million in remediation. So much like the ASTM standard defines the due diligence for the property condition assessment, the ASTM standard also describes due diligence for environmentals. At its lowest level, it's called a phase 1. What in the world is a phase 1 environmental assessment? ESA is environmental site assessment. EPA, you know, is Environmental Protection Agency. What that is, it's a data search blended with an on-site observation. So what's the data search? It's immensely in-depth. It looks at several hundred databases, everything from the local sheriff's department to determine if they ever had a crack bust. Are there underground storage tanks? Has it been a toxic waste dump? Is it on the Superfund? There are hundreds of databases that are searched, and there are proprietary products that search that database to say, all right, what is the history? Then the on-site looks for visible things that would indicate that the things in the database are still ongoing or things that are not in the database. And those two things blend together to build a phase 1 evaluation, immensely common in commercial. At its lowest level, it's typically, say, $2,000 plus or minus about 500, depending, you know, how sophisticated, how large, what the previous uses were, the on-site time. So at the start, it's about a $2,000 event. That's just sort of a go or no go, meaning is there anything here that seems scary? So if we use the shipyards as an example, then we go to the next phase, the phase 2, EPA phase 2 inspection, which is a separate ASTM standard. That's when you get involved in soil borings and soil sampling, asbestos sampling, where you're doing physical sampling that's having a lab analysis. Depending on the project, using the shipyards as an example, some of that's on the surface, some of that's, but there's been fill dirt on there, it goes down. I believe that the shipyards, they've done borings down to basically 50 feet or more, and what's in the attached water, not the water per se, but the submerged lands. This can get very, very, very expensive and very sophisticated. EDR, what the heck is an EDR? A neighborhood environmental report. If you look back to the phase 1, there's a data search and an on-site. A neighborhood environmental report is just the data search. There are companies around the country, we happen to be one of them, who subscribe to this service and can deliver the data search in about 5 minutes. It's a proprietary online product that we subscribe to. In about 5 minutes, we can give you the data side of an EPA phase 1 in about 5 minutes for under 200 bucks. It's a quick go, no go. We're watching commercial agents who have listings will spend a small amount of money to have the EDR and provide that as a piece of the due diligence from the seller to say the data search indicates clear. You have to be careful with this. This is not an EPA phase 1, and if a lender or other person involved in the due diligence is requiring an EPA phase 1, this doesn't meet that criteria, but it's a great way to get a very inexpensive, quick look. So who attends these commercial building inspections? Sometimes it's a giant committee, and sometimes it's no one at all. It's about a 50-50 split. The kinds of people who may show up, very often there's an acquisitions manager who's in charge of the acquisition. Sometimes they're bringing their contractors, their engineers, their other site people. They're coming to collect the data they need to prepare the building for its end use, as well as interact with the people doing the PCA and the existing maintenance staff to see what's going on. Other times there's no one there at all. So it runs the gamut. What's included in commercial due diligence? I reviewed with you the PCA, I reviewed with you the EPA phase 1, phase 2, or environmental data report. There's also a proprietary product. Again, this is, many companies use this. It's a subscription based. The BuildFacts, what that is, it's an online permit history. And it's really kind of cool thing. Rather than have to go permit by permit by permit, what it does, it's an online search, and it enables instantly to pull, and Jacksonville's pretty good on this. Atlantic Beach doesn't cooperate at all, so it varies place to place. But it lets you know what permits have been pulled over time, the amount of the permit, the scope of the permit, the inspection history on the permit, and who the contractor was that did the work. It's really interesting. When you know who the contractor that did the work in a commercial building, in some places that gives you great comfort, and sometimes it causes the buyer concern. It also scores the contractor who did the work. By the way, you can do this on residential also. We do it very commonly. Most people don't. But anyway, it scores the contractor, and how it scores the contractor is rather imperfect and rather interesting. It scores the contractor based on number of permits pulled in that municipality and when the last one was pulled. So I had an instance that we did a furniture warehouse up by the airport that had been vacant for a while. It had a roof on it about 20 years ago. We did the BuildFacts on it, and it turned out, and the roof was in pretty bad shape, but the roofing company who put that commercial building roof on, and this was probably a 40,000 square foot building, who put the roof on, pulled one permit in the company's history. They got into business, they did one roof, and then they were gone. That gives a particular insight into what's the warranty position, what's the follow-up position, what's the maintenance position. So we use all these tools to help people make great decisions. How long is the commercial due diligence period? Unlike residential, where it's typically a 10-day window, and it feels like the customer waits until day number 8 to ask for the inspection process. In commercial due diligence, we've been involved in, I was involved in one yesterday, a multifamily project, that the due diligence actually begins often prior to the contract being written or involved in the course of the negotiation. You can imagine these things are immensely sensitive. It's common, or not uncommon, in a commercial transaction that the address of the during the due diligence period, the specific address isn't even shared. They're protecting the seller, they're protecting the buyer, they're protecting the tenants, and they're also protecting their own, as an agent, their individual interest in what's going on, so they don't get scooped. So the due diligence period in commercial, the most common thing we see on, say, buildings under $5 million, under 50,000 or 100,000 square feet, is 30 to 60 days. As they get larger, as they get more complex, as the financing and whatnot gets crazier, sometimes those due diligence periods are 6 months or more. Thing like the shipyards, it's been in due diligence seemingly forever. Build your commercial real estate team. Much like in the residential universe, you've all been encouraged. You got to have your lenders, you got to have your inspectors, you got to have. What you'll discover in your commercial universe, it is even more intense. And you also notice a lot more variables. Yes, let's just use lending. In residential lending, this guy's really good at VA, this lady's really good at FHA, this one's good at renovation. It gets even more niche specific in commercial, in my experience. It's much more common to be dealing with out-of-town lenders. So in our residential world, we're accustomed to, I love this company, that's a local company, it's a local guy, I know them, they know me, we all know each other. That is more challenging in resident or in commercial, but I would encourage you to begin building those relationships. Excuse me, how do you build those relationships? It's by involvement, mentorship, and with other people who are doing the same thing. Certainly the Commercial Alliance of Real Estate is a piece of that. CCIM is a big, big deal in the commercial universe, much like the residential people may hold up GRI or CRS as being maybe the alpha of qualifications. The CCIM is the toughest of all credentials. There's a relatively small number. Sandra Kelly, who's a member of the Commercial Alliance, is a member of CCIM. She could give you some guidance on that. They tend to be very close-knit. They tend to be very highly experienced. And it's a good group to work toward being involved with. The Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, this again, because it uses the word realtors, you know, it's affiliated with NAR, and that can be a positive thing for you. This is not that large of a group in Jacksonville, but it's something else you want to be aware of. NAIOP, very active in Jacksonville. This has a tremendous number of members. They always met at the River Club until we couldn't meet at the River Club any longer. But very good group of people. And this is much broader than CCIM or Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, in that it's got a lot of people doing property management. It's got a lot of people doing development. It's much broader across the commercial scope, so you can meet a lot more people. The other thing I will share with you about these, most of the commercial groups and commercial designations, they tend to be significantly more expensive than what you're accustomed to in residential. It's just an expensive place to play. Membership in CCIM, just the three I share with you so far, they're all about $1,000 a piece, and the coursework is also quite expensive. Doesn't mean it's not worth it, just means it's expensive. Crew, commercial real estate women, very active local group, nice group of people, much like WCR on the residential side. They are welcoming of men, especially men who sponsor, but a nice group of people, very involved, very welcoming of new people and people just looking to get out and learn more. That is, my fine friends, the overview. If I can get the screen back. There we go. Ideally, are you seeing me again? Nod your head if you see me instead of the screen. Okay. So that in barely 40 minutes is the due diligence and inspections in the commercial building process. Any question, any comment, anybody got anything on their mind? Not just for me, but you can see all who's out there. Anything you've got or you'd like to share. Let me call on some people who I know have been involved in commercial in creative ways. Chris Byers, would you unmute yourself?
Yes, okay.
Caught you by surprise, buddy.
Yeah, I just got here too.
Yeah, so Chris has an interesting transition in the commercial universe, in that he is licensed in multiple states. He's here in Florida, which many of you know. Chris was at Exit for a long while with them, and then also now Coldwell Banker Commercial. Am I correct, Chris?
Coldwell Banker Vanguard.
Yeah, okay. Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
But anyway, but also
and Coldwell Banker Realty in Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts, that's where I was going. Working outside of Boston in commercial, working with clients in both locations, clients one to the other. Share some of your thoughts, Chris, on what life might be like as someone makes the transition from the residential universe into the commercial universe.
Wow, that is an interesting question. So going that direction, going from residential to commercial, there's a lot of things that people say are very different, and there are very different differences. When you're in residential, a lot of times people will say, it's more about emotion and more about, the kitchens and baths and making things look good. And commercial is all about price per square foot or, those sort of things. But I will tell you that my belief is that there's emotion in that too, in the commercial side. So I think that when you bring some of that, that kind of empathy for people into the commercial space, I think that's an advantage over over, some folks that really do think that this is, I'm a business person and I'm price per square foot and that sort of thing. I mean, you can come in and talk about how does an office feel?
Yeah.
And I think there's some advantages to that.
Chris, you've got a bad microphone.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
So it's making you pretty tough to hear. So,
okay. Well, let's pass on me then.
Yeah. So just so you can be thinking about some thoughts, I'm gonna shout out to Nicole and Rory and Scott here in some sequence or other. Let's jump over to Scott Nyman if we could. Scott, those of you who don't know Scott was a muckety-muck in the Century 21 universe through the Keys in Southwest Florida for a long time, transitioned up to Jacksonville, and in his over his career, bought, sold, and facilitated as an agent lots and lots of commercial property across the mix. Scott, what thoughts come to your mind for those who are evolving into the commercial universe?
Oh, lots. Well, number one, thanks. I've just been transitioning from my car to my house. I'm glad you caught me just in time to turn my mic on. You summed it up. It's probably the biggest difference that we used to share with people is it's such a emotional purchase on the residential side. As you stated, it is absolutely just completely different in the commercial side. The emotions are less effective. It is just more about, does this fit my purpose? Do the numbers work? All the things that you shared are just are critical. Yeah, it's just, and find your niche. Even commercial people, we're residential. You have people that do high-end residential properties, or some that focus on low-end, or some that focus on different areas. Commercial's no different. I know one commercial gentleman, all he does is industrial. I know you brought that up a few times. That's just his niche, and he focuses on it, and he does it very well. Some people just do leasing, focusing on that niche. So if you jump in and decide that commercial is what you want to do, then find a niche that you enjoy and you feel you're good at, and focus in on that.
Awesome, thanks. Let me ask Rory. Rory, would you unmute yourself for me, please? And by the way, if anybody's got something you want to ask or share, please do that. I'm just sort of facilitating. It's very welcome to have any input, or any question, anything. So those of you who don't know Rory at Exit Real Estate Gallery, Rory, again, very, very involved in commercial in Southwest Florida. I think he even did orange groves and all sorts of exotic stuff down there. Rory, you're a designation collector. You, sir, probably have more designations than anybody I know. For the person who's looking to earn designation in the commercial space for that credibility and all the same reasons they did in residential, what do you see as the holy grail in commercial designations, and what do you see as maybe a simpler first step?
I would say, can you hear me?
It's not a great mic, but I can hear you. One of the reasons we're doing this is so we all get better at Zoom. I'm here to tell you, our business is growing during the downturn on the back of Zoom. Learning to do this, getting your lighting right, getting your mic right, I'm not picking at you, Roy, I'm loving you and just sharing with everybody. You will discover you can do business with people in places you never could have got in person through Zoom. But go ahead, Roy.
Sure. So I would say the holy grail is probably CCIM. I did about half of it years ago, never finished it. So I defer to Scott, since when he's our CCIM on the call here. I would say a good easy step, it's one that you didn't mention and it has multiple applications, very good for Northeast Florida, is an accredited land consultant. So as you know, land can be zoned commercial or residential. There is a lot of commercial land. There's a need for more commercial land, especially certain types. I would say dealing in commercial land is a good way to get familiar with the different zoning out there. CC CG and industrial specific. There's as many different zonings in commercial, if not more so, than residential.
Probably more.
And I would get familiar if you're looking to get into commercial on what the demand is like out there. So I'm sure Nicole and Jonathan and Chris would agree with me. In our area right now, very high demand for multifamily housing, very high demand for the proper strip malls, I would say. So that's probably the two most sought after that I'm running across.
Yeah.
And just, I used to do, years ago, I used to do ICSC, which is the International Shopping Consortium Society or something like that.
They're involved here too. They have a very active
and they're involved here too. And I used to go to the meetings down in Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood when I lived over in Sarasota. I would say just knowing what the trends are. So a very big trend on retail, for example, is you're not going to see new malls, AKA like Regency or Orange Park Mall. You're not going to see those built. Malls, indoor malls are a thing in the past. But if all you've ever done, if all you've ever done is residential, you may not be aware of that. But I mean, strip malls are going to be the future, and outlet malls, like we have a lot of those around us as well. Is going to be all retail. There will not be these air-conditioned indoor walkable malls because it's cost prohibitive, and it's hard to keep good tenants in those because it is very costly.
They're full of old people. They're full of old people.
Yes, and I try to avoid old people. Scott goes to them, but I don't go to them. So, so I would say just being aware of those trend lines. I did a lot of office early in my career. So when I was down in Sarasota, Venice area, all I did was commercial. I started in commercial, did no residential till I came to Duval 9 years ago. Yeah. So it was all commercial. But I did almost all leases, and I worked for a developer for a while, commercial developer in Venice, Florida, South Sarasota County. So I did office space. To me, I liked office space. It was a little more simple. Yeah. And you have to choose your niche. Like even now, I don't want to do industrial. So if I had industrial, I'd send it to Scott or Nicole or somebody, see if they want to play with it. Way too complicated, in my opinion. Very, very specific, with the exception of maybe like some warehouse space. But anything that's truly manufacturing space, I don't want it. Yeah. So I like small commercial leases in strip malls. That's my thing. Out parcels. I did a lot of out parcels. Restaurants, gas stations, banks, that's more my bag. I don't want to do these multi-million-dollar, and I mean, it's tempting to grab everything if you're getting into commercial. You don't want to do that because it's hard to succeed in that. Yep. So know what you get comfortable with and what you like, and don't try to do all things in commercial just like you wouldn't necessarily try to do that in residential.
And it's a much smaller universe. So you can't hide amongst 10,000 agents like you can in residential if you do something goofy. It is
exactly because Nicole, Chris, and Scott will call you out if you do that. So.
Yeah, thanks, Rory. Let's jump over to Nicole. Can you talk where you are, Nicole? There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
All right.
So what I wanted to ask of you, Nicole, is, and Nicole Ryan is actually the co-chair of this. All the things that happen right in the Commercial Alliance, Nicole does. Scott thinks of some stuff, I think of some stuff. Nicole is the doer. She is the quintessential commercial real estate brain. Perfect. And she's on the commercial end of an exit. I wanted to ask you to share some thoughts on why it's so important, or is it so important? I think it's important that a residential agent have strong referral relationships with commercial agents so that you can get deals done, serve the customer really well, and still get a really hefty piece of the action.
I think relationships to me are important even now within every transaction that I work on. The biggest, it's almost not a warning, but just a share is in commercial real estate, it's different than residential because it's buyer beware. They're expected to have a team in place that's going to take care of them. There's no protection for them in relation to what they're getting into. There's not the disclosures that you get on the residential side. So it's just making sure that you're doing what's appropriate and taking care of your customer the best that you can. And if that means bringing in another agent that can assist you through the transaction, or bringing in a good team in place that has really good credentials and experience within that market and within that type of a real estate piece, you're protecting your customer and you're also protecting yourself.
Great. Awesome. Appreciate that. I'm going to ask Lisa. Lisa from Golden Dog Title, one of our sponsors. She also helped us coordinate one of our lunch and learns. We had a great speaker from there. Lisa, what specific things have you got going on over at Golden Dog to support the commercial transaction?
Well, we have a commercial department, and we've got 2 attorneys that also work in that. And we do a lot of the land development because, as you know, we have dream finders, so we do a lot of that. And we can look at a commercial lease and review it for you, or a commercial contract.
Appreciate that. It's good to have resources. It's good to have places you can call. Respecting everyone's time. We're going to quit by noon, but I thought I'd tell you a story. Oh, is Marika here? Ah, there she is. Marika, girlfriend, unmute yourself. There you go. No, you turned off your video, dear. We want to see you and hear you.
How about now?
Now I hear you, but I don't see you.
Oh, I don't know how to do this. How about now?
Now you're perfect. So give us some insight on Heakin Law and Landmark Title and what specific things you may have to support the commercial transaction.
Okay, well, so we are a full service real estate law firm and title company, so we can pretty much do any commercial transaction start to finish. We don't have a full-time land use attorney, although Todd does some stuff with that, but we, draft commercial contracts, process them, close them, also review commercial leases, draft, prepare those. And then we also have our litigation department that handles any, title curative issues that may come up, and, drafting various easements and whatever agreements we need to make the deal work.
Awesome. I appreciate that. To sponsors, presently there are only 3 companies who stepped up to sponsor. So if you know people who'd like to be involved with us, have them reach out to Nicole, reach out to me, and we're happy to have them. We're doing real well in the title companies. We don't necessarily need any more of that. And but insurers or other people involved in due diligence, involved in commercial, we would welcome them, though I guess they're all saving their money. So I'm going to tell you a story just for a couple of minutes, and then I promise we'll be done before noon. But I found this interesting. I'm a part of a lot of business development mastermind groups around the country. We spend a lot of time together in person, not right now, traveling around the country to try to learn to do business better. And now we're doing a lot of things remote. And last night, I was a part of a group called GoBundance. Does anybody know GoBundance? GoBundance. Some of you may find it interesting. Essentially, it's a group of business owners and entrepreneurs who are also all qualified investors, if that rings a bell to some of you, others not. Qualified investor means you have at least $1 million in investable assets. Anyway, they do these regular calls talking about business, some drilling deep on their individual businesses, some specific to industry types, some looking across the country and what's going on. And they commonly bring in guests. And last night's guest, this is a relatively small group. Last night's guest was a gentleman named Jeff Hoffman. If Jeff Hoffman's familiar name to you, raise your hand. I'm just casually curious. Okay. So Jeff Hoffman did a few interesting things in his life. When he was in his 20s, he is the guy who invented, developed, and implemented the airport kiosk where you check in and you can check in by kiosk. That was Jeff. He did that at 26. that set him up pretty well to do some other neat things and meet some neat people. He went on to start or co-found several companies. Tell me if you've heard of these, just raise your hand. Priceline, Booking.com, Ubid.com, and a host of others. He's an immensely wealthy man. He's a multi-billionaire who now spends his time, he's the chairman, he founded it and chaired it, the Global Entrepreneurship Network. That's how he got involved with us at GoBundance, is reaching out and sharing ideas and connecting things for people who are entrepreneurial, who are looking to do creative things. One of the things he did last week, it's kind of crazy with all this stuff going on with the pandemic and COVID-19, there's a critical shortage of sanitizers, hand sanitizers. Some of you may be aware or noticed, many of our local distilleries are now producing hand sanitizers. Manifest is St. Augustine Distillery. It's a natural byproduct of distillation. They're doing that because it's good for the community. They're doing that because they can make a little bit of money, and that's good too. So Jeff connected a GoBundance member who owns a distillery in High Point, North Carolina, and he's involved with the Prime Minister of Ghana, of all things, and there are people dying with no hand sanitizer. Connected these two people to look to bring hand sanitizers to Ghana. They discovered it just wasn't practical, and instead they've now, this is in a week, they built a consortium of West African countries who are being coached and mentored by this lady in North Carolina of how to go from distillation to hand sanitizer. And they're saving these companies all over West Africa, and they're saving lives all over West Africa. It was pretty interesting. That's the kind of stuff on Jeff. So one of the questions asked of Jeff was, what do you see different when we come out of this funk that we're all in? There's no expectations that our businesses are going to look like they went on the way in. Some of us may fantasize they look the same way, but they're not. Some of it will look the same. I see Lisa smile and Andrews, and Marika could tell also, all of a sudden it's virtual notarizations and drive-by closings. Some of these things we've been forced to do, people like more than they like the old way.
Yep.
And some of these things, almost like we're doing today, become more efficient and more cost effective. And those of us, and all of you are included in that by virtue that you're here, who have said, let's look at our businesses different. Let's do some things different so that we can conduct business. My reality has been a lot of what the changes that have been forced upon us that we've embraced, they aren't going away. What's going to go away is people who aren't embracing the change. So the question for Jeff was predictions, which are always dangerous. He said he didn't like predictions, but some things that may be different when we come out of it. Jeff said, this is the guy who founded Priceline. This is interesting to me. Travel will never recover. That the people who've continued to conduct business remotely, just like you and I are doing, are saying, you know what? I don't need to drive over to Scott's office. I can jump on a Zoom. We're seeing it in meetings just like this. We're seeing it. And his expectation is travel will never look the same. And all of the things that impacts, hotels, event planners, very different. Other thoughts on his mind. Virtual workspace rising. That the companies, we've seen Zoom quadruple in stock value in 3 weeks. The companies who are facilitating remote work, try to buy a webcam right now from Logitech. The companies that are facilitating remote work are growing like crazy. And the people who are embracing remote work, there's been no one in my office but me. This is the 4th week. It's really interesting. We haven't missed a beat. Other predictions, telemedicine on the rise. The AMA and other groups have fought against telemedicine for decades. It's now been forced by the government and by need. And the expectation is it's going to become a norm where your primary care person may very well be a person that you chat with just like this. You put on your blood cuff, you put your other thing here, and they can do 99% of what they needed to do remotely, much quicker, much more efficient. Distance learning and homeschooling. Homeschooling is also attributing to a rise in domestic violence and divorce. But the people who are figuring this out, both in terms of the companies who are facilitating and the people who embraced it, there's an expectation that a lot of these kids aren't going back to school in a physical traditional sense. It's very interesting. We're seeing that at elementary, at high school, college, and graduate level. You said, you know, go home and figure out how to do it on your own. And some people are figuring out how to do that really well. Here's another interesting one. Fewer cars on the road. Ryan, not Cole Ryan, but Ryan Wagner that runs our company, only had one car. That was a choice he and his wife made. She is a medical biller. He, you know, works here running this company. And they only had one car and they got along just fine. Now they have two cars and neither of them has gone to work in 3 weeks. And we're going to see with the rise of remote workers and distant learning, a decline in cars. A couple more for you. A decline in commercial real estate valuation and occupancy. It's very interesting. So we've learned to get along for 2 or 3 months without going to the office. This prediction is we're going to see a lot of flex space, a lot of meeting space, but way fewer places where everyone goes to work every day and each has their own space. And an increase in co-work space, and he made the caveat, not like WeWork, but co-work, co-space. And one other thing, the GoBundance, they have 6 pillars of GoBundance. And one of them is age-defying health. And as a guy who's will be 64 in September, it's been interesting for me personally. I've always been a get up at 5 o'clock and go work out guy. I'm more focused now, my wife and I made a time, more focused on personal health and wellness than we ever were before, about what we're eating, how we're taking care of each other, how we're taking care of our brains, our minds. We can get isolated in the situation we find ourselves in. So I'd encourage all of you to be reaching out to other people personally, be reaching out to other people professionally, be thinking about how you're structuring your day, I get up and dress up every day. I have to do this, it's part of my wellness, but really taking care of yourselves and reaching out to somebody else. It could be somebody from here, somebody in your family, and say, I'm in a funk. This isolation thing isn't real good for me. So I went a minute over, but I was excited about that. Anybody got any parting words or thoughts they'd like to share collectively, or shout out to any other individual you see here with us? All righty. Well, again, gratitude to Lisa from Golden Dog and Marika from Landmark for the sponsorship. We spent no money today, so we're going to have one hell of a happy hour when this all breaks out. I wish y'all well. If I can help any of you individually, personally or professionally, reach out. And oh, one more thing. At 3 o'clock today, back to me becoming a Zoomaholic, I'm doing another program not related to Commercial Alliance called How to Become the Celebrity Expert in Your Real Estate Niche. I can tell you from my personal experience, the more visible you are, the easier it is to do larger quantities of business. So if you got nothing to do at 3, we'll be Facebook live streaming as well as Zooming. And if you need that, let me know and I'll make sure you have that. So everybody have a beautiful day.
Hey, Wally?
Yes, ma'am.
Wally, I had a couple of people send me messages asking if you're going to provide some of those slides that I could forward to the attendants. Is that something that you're willing to do?
Say that again. If I'll do what?
Oh, are you going to provide, can I provide the slides? I've had a couple of people message me asking me if I could share the slides with them.
Yeah, I'll do 2 things. Zoom, and I can't encourage you enough to learn the fundamentals of Zoom. Zoom allows you to, like this call, we're also streaming it on Facebook Live, so we're touching people, I don't even know who they are. It also allows you to record. And I've got a pro version, it's $15 a month. The free version is free. It has a few less features. But anyway, so what I'll do later in the day, the Facebook Live lives live forever. The Zoom will end up on YouTube. So I'll send you, Nicole, once I got Facebook Live, I'll send you the slides as well as the recording of the whole thing we did together. And then you can distribute it to the list and you can do whatever you want. Anybody else? All right. It was a lunch and learn, and I didn't get to eat yet. So everybody have a beautiful day. Appreciate you. Bye.